You have been playing a game your entire life that somebody forgot to tell you the other side stopped playing years ago, quietly, without ever announcing it. You follow the rules. You wait your turn. You give people the benefit of the doubt, again and again, certain that fairness will eventually be returned to you, because that is simply how decent people are supposed to treat each other, and how you were always taught the world was actually supposed to work. Meanwhile, somewhere close to you, right now, someone is breaking every single one of those same rules without a flicker of hesitation, and quietly winning because of it, while you remain the only one still keeping score honestly. 500 years ago, a Florentine political thinker named Niccolò Machiavelli watched this exact imbalance destroy honest men again and again, and he wrote down exactly why fairness, offered to people who have already abandoned it, is not virtue, it is surrender. Tonight, we break down his darkest lessons on exactly when to stop playing fair, and exactly what it costs you when you refuse to. Welcome to The Hidden Mind, the channel dedicated to uncovering the real mechanics of power, psychology, and human nature hiding beneath the surface of everyday life, including the quiet, costly assumption that fairness protects itself without ever requiring your own direct, deliberate involvement. If you are new here, you should know this is not a channel built around comfortable, feel-good affirmations. It is a channel built around the uncomfortable, unfiltered truths that actually protect you the moment you genuinely understand them, rather than simply making you feel better for the length of a single video. Today's video takes on one of the most controversial, most misunderstood pieces of Machiavelli's entire body of work. His cold, unsentimental case for abandoning fairness, the instant fairness stops being reciprocated by the people you are actually dealing with. We are going to walk through 7 of his darkest, most uncomfortable power lessons, lessons about rules, mercy, dignity, and necessity that directly challenge nearly everything most of us were taught about how decent people are supposed to behave, particularly when the person across from us has already decided decency was optional. This is genuinely difficult material, and before we go any further, it deserves a clear, direct framing. This video is not an invitation to become cruel, dishonest, or genuinely harmful toward people who have done nothing to deserve that treatment. It is an examination of exactly when continuing to play fair against an opponent who has already abandoned fairness stops being virtue and starts being a slow, one-sided surrender, and exactly what Machiavelli believed the alternative required of you instead. Before we begin, I want to ask you for a few small things that genuinely matter to this channel and the growing community around it. If today's video gives you even one moment of real clarity, please take a couple of seconds to hit the like button. It is the simplest, most direct way to help this video reach more people who genuinely need it. Leave a comment below and tell us honestly about a time you kept playing fair against someone who clearly was not. We read every single comment, and they genuinely shape what we build here next. If you know someone who keeps losing precisely because they refuse to abandon a rulebook the other side has already thrown away, share this video with them. It might be exactly the shift they have been needing. And if you have not yet subscribed to The Hidden Mind, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now, because we release a brand new deep dive into power, psychology, and human nature every single week. Finally, if this channel provides real value to you, please consider supporting our work directly with a super thanks using the button below. Every single contribution genuinely helps us continue building this project. Now, let's get into exactly when Machiavelli believed fairness stops being a virtue, and exactly what he believed you owed yourself once that specific line has genuinely been crossed. Why Machiavelli stopped believing in the referee. Before we walk through the 7 lessons themselves, it is worth understanding exactly where Machiavelli's deep, hard-won skepticism toward fairness actually came from, because it did not emerge from cold theory, it emerged from watching real people, including himself, get genuinely destroyed by their own honest adherence to a fairness the world around them was not actually reciprocating. Machiavelli served the Florentine Republic for over a decade in genuine positions of diplomatic trust, watching political alliances form and shatter with startling speed, watching leaders who kept their word lose everything to leaders who never intended to keep theirs, and eventually watching his own considerable service and loyalty fail to protect him at all once the political winds shifted decisively against him, resulting in his imprisonment, his interrogation, and his humiliating exile. This lived experience shaped a conclusion he stated with genuine, uncomfortable bluntness throughout his work, that most people implicitly assume some invisible referee is watching every interaction, ready to eventually step in and correct any genuine unfairness, rewarding those who play by the rules and punishing those who do not. Machiavelli looked directly at actual political life and concluded that this referee simply does not exist, that fairness is not a law of the universe automatically enforced by anyone. It is a fragile, voluntary agreement between two parties, and the instant one party abandons that agreement, the other party's continued adherence to it stops protecting them and starts actively costing them. This is the foundation for everything discussed throughout today's video, and it is worth sitting with honestly before we move forward, because it directly challenges one of the most deeply held, rarely examined assumptions most of us carry through our entire lives. Lesson 1. The referee you are waiting for was never coming. The first and most foundational lesson concerns the specific, deeply ingrained habit of waiting for some external authority, karma, justice, a boss, a judge, public opinion, to eventually notice an unfair situation and correct it on your behalf. A habit that Machiavelli observed left an enormous number of genuinely honest people waiting indefinitely for a correction that political and social reality rarely, if ever, actually delivers on its own. Consider how directly this pattern shows up in ordinary modern workplaces. An employee whose ideas are repeatedly claimed by a more assertive colleague continues quietly documenting the injustice, certain that eventually, someone in leadership will notice the pattern and correct it, while the colleague claiming credit continues advancing steadily, because leadership, absent any direct, forceful intervention from the person actually being wronged, has no particular incentive to go looking for an injustice nobody has clearly, directly brought to their attention. Machiavelli's uncomfortable insight here is that fairness rarely enforces itself, and that waiting passively for someone else to notice and correct an injustice on your behalf is frequently a strategy indistinguishable from simply accepting that injustice indefinitely. This lesson asks you to identify, honestly, where in your own life you have been waiting for an external referee that Machiavelli would tell you plainly is never actually coming, and to consider what direct, deliberate action, rather than patient waiting, that specific situation might actually require of you instead. Lesson 2. Rules only bind the side that still believes in them. The second lesson concerns a genuinely important, genuinely uncomfortable observation about the actual practical function of rules and agreed-upon norms within any competitive or conflicted relationship. The fact that these rules only actually constrain the behavior of whichever party continues to genuinely believe in and honor them, while providing essentially zero protection against a party who has quietly decided those same rules no longer apply to their own conduct. Machiavelli observed this dynamic constantly among the political rivals and alliances he studied closely, noting that formal agreements, treaties, and understood codes of conduct functioned considerably more like a one-sided leash than a genuinely mutual constraint. The instant one party privately decided to disregard them, while the other continued operating as though the agreement remained fully intact and mutually honored. Consider how this plays out in ordinary modern negotiation and conflict. Two business partners enter an informal understanding about how decisions will be shared and how credit will be divided, and one partner continues honoring this understanding faithfully, consulting the other before every major decision, while the other partner has quietly begun making unilateral moves whenever it suits them, correctly calculating that the first partner's continued good faith adherence to their original agreement provides real, exploitable room to maneuver. The honest partner, still operating as though the original mutual agreement remains fully in force, is effectively fighting with one hand deliberately tied behind their back, constrained by rules the other side has already privately abandoned. This lesson asks you to develop genuine, ongoing awareness of whether the specific rules, agreements, and codes of conduct governing any significant relationship or negotiation in your own life are actually still being mutually honored, or whether you have become the only party still meaningfully bound by an understanding the other side quietly stopped respecting some time ago. Lesson 3. Mercy offered too early gets read as weakness, not virtue. The third lesson concerns a genuinely uncomfortable but genuinely important observation about timing and interpretation, the specific danger of extending mercy, forgiveness, or a second chance before the other party has actually demonstrated they understand and respect what that mercy genuinely cost you to extend. Machiavelli observed that leaders who forgave betrayal too readily, too quickly, and without extracting any genuine acknowledgement or consequence from the party responsible were frequently perceived by that same party and by everyone else observing the exchange, not as admirably gracious, but as fundamentally unwilling or unable to enforce any real consequence for wrongdoing, a perception that, once established, tended to invite considerably more of the exact behavior the premature mercy was originally intended to move past. Consider how this pattern plays out in ordinary modern relationships. Someone who forgives a repeated betrayal immediately and completely every single time it occurs, without ever requiring any genuine acknowledgement, genuine change, or genuine consequence from the person responsible, frequently discovers that this immediate, unconditional mercy does not actually produce the gratitude or improved behavior they were hoping for, and instead produces something closer to quiet contempt, because the person being forgiven has learned, through repeated direct experience, that no genuine cost is ever actually attached to their behavior. Machiavelli's uncomfortable insight here is not that mercy itself is always a mistake. Mercy extended at the right moment, to someone who has genuinely demonstrated understanding and genuine change, remains a genuinely powerful, relationship-building act. His insight is specifically about timing, that mercy extended too early, before any genuine reckoning has actually occurred, frequently produces the opposite of its intended effect, teaching the other party that your forgiveness is unconditional and therefore, in a very real practical sense, worthless as any kind of meaningful deterrent against repeating the exact same behavior again. Lesson 4. The level playing field is a myth told to the losing side. The fourth lesson concerns a genuinely difficult truth about competitive environments generally, workplaces, industries, even families and friendship groups. The fact that these environments are rarely, if ever, actually starting from a genuinely level, equally fair position for every single participant, regardless of how frequently that comforting fiction gets repeated to everyone involved. Machiavelli observed clearly that political actors who genuinely believed they were competing on equal, fair terms with rivals who actually held considerable structural advantages, inherited wealth, existing alliances, informational access the less advantaged party simply did not have, consistently made strategic decisions based on a false premise, decisions that assumed a fairness in the underlying structure of the competition that simply was not actually present. Consider how this insight applies to modern professional and social competition. Someone entering a competitive industry without the existing professional network, financial cushion, or informal mentorship that some of their competitors already possess is not actually competing on a level playing field, however frequently that comforting language gets used to describe the situation, and strategizing as though the field genuinely is level, expecting pure, unassisted merit alone to produce an equal, fair outcome regardless of these underlying structural differences, frequently leads to genuine, confusing disappointment when equally hard work does not produce equal results. This lesson does not ask you to become bitter or defeatist about genuine structural disadvantage, a response that produces nothing genuinely useful. It asks you to see the actual, honest shape of the competitive field you are genuinely operating within, rather than the comforting, idealized version frequently described to you, so that your strategy can be built around genuine reality rather than around a fiction that, however well-intentioned, will not actually protect you from the real, structural disadvantages a more honest assessment would have revealed clearly from the very beginning. Lesson 5. Losing with dignity only serves the person who beat you. The fifth lesson concerns a genuinely provocative but genuinely worthwhile observation about who actually benefits from the cultural expectation that losing gracefully, quietly, and without genuine protest or genuine consequence is always the more admirable, more dignified response to genuine unfair treatment. Machiavelli observed that this expectation, however socially comfortable it may be for everyone else observing a conflict, disproportionately benefits whoever actually won, and whoever benefited from whatever unfairness occurred along the way, because a graceful, quiet loser creates considerably less social friction, considerably less accountability, and considerably less genuine cost for the party who actually engaged in the unfair conduct in the first place. Consider how this dynamic plays out in ordinary modern professional and personal conflicts. Someone who is genuinely, unfairly passed over for a promotion in favor of a less qualified but more politically connected colleague, and who responds by accepting the outcome quietly and gracefully, without raising any genuine, direct concern through appropriate channels, spares the organization and the colleague who benefited from considerable discomfort and considerable accountability. Discomfort and accountability that a more direct, less immediately graceful response might have actually produced. This is not an argument for becoming bitter, vindictive, or disproportionately aggressive in every single instance of genuine unfairness, an approach that carries its own genuine costs and is rarely actually strategically wise. It is an argument for genuinely, honestly examining who actually benefits from your own instinct toward quiet, graceful acceptance of unfair treatment, and considering whether that instinct, however socially comfortable and admirable it might feel in the moment, is actually serving your own genuine interests, or whether it is primarily serving the comfort and continued advantage of whoever benefited from the original unfairness in the first place. Lesson 6. Necessity cancels the rulebook, and Machiavelli knew exactly when. The sixth lesson concerns perhaps the single most misunderstood, most frequently oversimplified piece of Machiavelli's entire philosophy, his genuinely nuanced argument about when genuine necessity justifies setting aside conventional rules of fair conduct. An argument popular culture has frequently flattened into a crude, blanket license for cruelty that Machiavelli's actual, careful writing never actually provided. Machiavelli's genuine argument was considerably more precise than this crude popular version suggests. He argued that genuine necessity, situations where the survival or fundamental well-being of yourself or the people depending on you was genuinely, seriously at stake, justified setting aside conventional rules of fair conduct in a way that ordinary, lower-stakes disagreement or simple personal preference never actually did. This is a genuinely important, genuinely narrow distinction, because it means Machiavelli's darkest, most ruthless advice was never intended as a general operating principle for every single ordinary interaction and minor disagreement in your life. It was specifically reserved for situations of genuine, serious necessity, where the actual stakes involved were substantial enough to justify the real cost of setting conventional fairness aside. Consider how this distinction applies to modern life. Setting aside typical professional courtesy and diplomatic patience when a genuine, serious threat to your livelihood, your safety, or your family's genuine well-being is actually seriously at stake represents a genuinely different situation than abandoning ordinary fairness and courtesy over a minor, low-stakes disagreement or a small, forgivable slight that does not actually threaten anything genuinely significant in your life. This lesson asks you to develop genuine, honest discernment about which category any given situation you are actually facing genuinely falls into, reserving Machiavelli's darker, more ruthless lessons specifically for situations of genuine, serious necessity, rather than applying them indiscriminately to every minor frustration and disagreement that crosses your path, a misapplication that would genuinely damage your relationships and your own character considerably more than it would ever actually protect you. Lesson 7. Ruthless is not cruel, it is refusing to fight with one hand tied. The seventh and final lesson concerns the crucial distinction that must anchor everything discussed throughout today's video: the meaningful, important difference between genuine ruthlessness, as Machiavelli actually described and intended it, and genuine cruelty, a distinction his own popular reputation has frequently blurred beyond recognition across 5 centuries of oversimplified retelling. Genuine ruthlessness, in the sense discussed throughout today's video, means refusing to remain the only party still honoring a fairness the other side has already abandoned, refusing to wait indefinitely for a referee who was never actually coming, refusing to extend premature mercy that only teaches the other party your forgiveness carries no real cost, and refusing to accept graceful, quiet defeat purely because that response is more comfortable for everyone else to witness. Genuine cruelty means something entirely different, actively seeking to harm, deceive, or exploit people who have done nothing to deserve that treatment, purely for your own gain, satisfaction, or sense of power over them. Machiavelli's actual, careful argument, properly understood, was never a case for the second thing. It was a case for refusing to remain unilaterally disarmed against people who had already, unilaterally, decided to abandon fairness themselves. This distinction matters enormously as you consider applying everything discussed throughout today's video to your own actual life and relationships. The person you should be willing to stop playing fair with is specifically the person who has already, demonstrably, repeatedly abandoned fairness in their own conduct toward you, not everyone in your life indiscriminately, and not as a general default operating principle applied reflexively to every relationship and every disagreement you will ever encounter. Carrying this distinction clearly and honestly is precisely what separates genuinely applying Machiavelli's actual, nuanced philosophy from simply using his dark reputation as convenient cover for becoming someone genuinely worse than the people this video has been encouraging you to finally stop losing to. Bringing the 7 lessons together. Having walked through all 7 of these lessons individually, it is worth stepping back to see the coherent, unified philosophy, connecting them into a single, practical approach to knowing exactly when fairness stops protecting you and starts costing you. Recognizing that no external referee is coming to correct an injustice on your behalf removes the passive waiting that frequently leaves genuine unfairness unaddressed indefinitely. Understanding that rules only bind the party who still believes in them protects you from being the only person still honoring an agreement the other side has quietly abandoned. Recognizing that premature mercy frequently produces the opposite of its intended effect protects you from repeatedly forgiving behavior that will simply continue, unchanged, because no genuine cost was ever actually attached to it. Seeing the genuine, honest shape of any competitive field, rather than its comforting, idealized fiction, allows you to strategize based on reality rather than on wishful thinking. Questioning who actually benefits from your own instinct toward quiet, graceful defeat protects you from a socially comfortable response that primarily serves whoever benefited from the original unfairness. Reserving Machiavelli's darker, more ruthless lessons specifically for situations of genuine necessity, rather than applying them indiscriminately, protects your relationships and your own character from genuine, unnecessary damage. And maintaining the crucial, clear distinction between genuine ruthlessness and genuine cruelty ensures that everything discussed throughout today's video remains a genuine shield protecting your own legitimate interests, rather than becoming a weapon you deploy carelessly against people who never actually deserved that treatment from you in the first place. Why this advice feels so genuinely dangerous to accept. It is worth naming directly, before we move any further, exactly why material like today's video tends to produce such genuine discomfort, even among people who can intellectually follow and even agree with the logic behind each individual lesson. Most of us were raised with a deep, often unexamined belief that fairness is a moral absolute, something owed to every single person in every single situation, regardless of how they themselves have behaved. A belief reinforced by religious teaching, by childhood socialization, and by the simple, comfortable stories most cultures tell about how good behavior is eventually recognized and rewarded. Suggesting that fairness should ever be conditional, that it can be legitimately withdrawn once the other party has already withdrawn theirs, can feel, to many genuinely thoughtful people, like an invitation toward moral decay, a slippery slope where any bad behavior becomes justifiable the instant someone convinces themselves the other side started it first. This concern deserves genuine, honest engagement rather than dismissal, because it points toward something real. The history of human conflict is genuinely full of examples where exactly this justification, they started it, they broke the rules first, has been used to excuse behavior that was, by any reasonable measure, considerably worse than whatever provoked it, an escalating spiral where each side's retaliation becomes the next side's justification, producing outcomes considerably more destructive than the original unfairness that started the entire cycle. This is precisely why Lesson 7, discussed earlier throughout today's video, matters so enormously, and why it deserves to anchor everything else discussed here, rather than functioning as a minor afterthought tacked onto the end. The genuine test Machiavelli's more careful, more precise argument actually demands is not simply, did they wrong me first? A test almost anyone can convince themselves they pass given sufficient motivated reasoning, but rather a considerably more demanding, more honest standard, is my response genuinely proportionate to what has actually, demonstrably occurred, and am I certain, through honest, careful reflection, rather than through convenient self-justification, that I am not simply using someone else's earlier misstep as cover for behavior I would recognize as genuinely wrong if I encountered it directed at myself. This is a considerably harder standard to actually meet than the crude, popular version of ruthless self-interest that Machiavelli's dark reputation frequently implies. And holding yourself to this harder, more honest standard is precisely what separates genuinely applying his careful, nuanced philosophy from simply using it as convenient cover for behavior that deserves genuine scrutiny, regardless of what the other party may have done first. How Machiavelli's own experience shaped this exact distinction. It is worth returning, briefly, to the specific details of Machiavelli's own biography, because his lived experience offers a genuinely useful window into exactly how he arrived at the careful, narrow version of ruthlessness this video has been describing throughout, rather than the crude, unlimited version his popular reputation frequently suggests. After the Medici family returned to power in Florence in 1512, Machiavelli was removed from the diplomatic position he had held for over a decade, and shortly afterward became implicated, most historians believe wrongly, in a conspiracy against the new government. He was imprisoned and subjected to genuine, severe torture, and eventually released into an impoverished, humiliating exile that stripped him of the career and reputation he had spent his entire adult life building. If Machiavelli's actual philosophy genuinely amounted to unlimited, indiscriminate ruthlessness applied to every person and every situation, without genuine discernment, we might reasonably expect his own subsequent conduct, after suffering this genuinely severe betrayal, to reflect exactly that kind of unlimited, embittered response. A man who emerged from prison and exile, determined to treat everyone around him, including people who had nothing to do with his downfall, with the same suspicion and ruthlessness he might have reasonably reserved specifically for the actual architects of his disgrace. This is not, by any credible historical account, what actually happened. His surviving letters reveal a man who remained genuinely warm, genuinely engaged, and genuinely trusting with the friends and family who had shown him actual, demonstrated loyalty throughout his ordeal, reserving his considerably darker, more guarded philosophy specifically for his understanding of formal political conduct and for the specific individuals who had actually, demonstrably betrayed him. This distinction, between his personal conduct toward people who had earned his continued trust and his considerably more guarded philosophy regarding people and institutions that had already demonstrated bad faith, is precisely the same distinction this entire video has been asking you to maintain in your own life. Machiavelli did not become a man who trusted no one after his own betrayal. He became a man who understood clearly, through genuinely painful direct experience, exactly which specific people and situations had actually earned his guardedness, while remaining genuinely capable of warmth, loyalty, and good faith toward everyone else who had never actually given him reason to withdraw it. Recognizing the difference between a pattern and a single mistake, there is a genuinely important, practical skill worth developing explicitly before we move toward today's close: the ability to distinguish clearly between a single, isolated instance of someone falling short of fairness, which every single person is genuinely capable of on an occasional bad day, and a genuine, demonstrated pattern of repeated bad faith that actually justifies the kind of response discussed throughout today's video. This distinction matters enormously in practice, because applying today's lessons to a single, isolated lapse, treating one instance of someone being short-tempered, forgetful, or momentarily inconsiderate, as though it constituted the kind of demonstrated bad faith this video has actually been describing, would represent exactly the kind of misapplication the previous warning section was specifically cautioning against. Machiavelli's own careful observation of political betrayal consistently focused on genuine, repeated patterns. A rival who broke an agreement once, under genuinely unusual and understandable circumstances, and then genuinely returned to honoring that agreement afterward, was treated very differently in his analysis than a rival who broke agreements repeatedly, consistently, and without any genuine acknowledgement or attempt at correction. This same distinction deserves careful, honest application in your own life. A friend who forgets to follow through on one commitment during a genuinely difficult period in their own life is not the same as a friend who has repeatedly, consistently failed to follow through on commitments across many months or years, regardless of your own circumstances or their own stated intentions to improve. A colleague who claims slightly more credit than they deserve on one single occasion, perhaps genuinely believing their own contribution was larger than it actually was, is not the same as a colleague who has established a clear, repeated pattern of consistently minimizing your contributions while inflating their own, across multiple separate instances observed over meaningful time. Developing genuine skill at this specific distinction, pattern versus isolated instance, protects you from two equally significant errors: continuing to extend unlimited good faith toward someone who has already established a genuine, repeated pattern of bad faith, and prematurely withdrawing fairness from someone who has simply had one difficult, forgivable moment that does not actually represent anything close to the kind of demonstrated pattern this entire video has been describing throughout. A case study in what proportionate response actually looks like. It is worth walking through a genuinely concrete, detailed example of exactly how the 7 lessons discussed throughout today's video might actually apply together in a real, plausible situation, because abstract principles frequently become considerably clearer once they are traced through an actual, specific sequence of events, rather than discussed only in general terms. Consider a professional scenario, genuinely common across many industries, where a colleague has begun, over the course of several months, consistently taking primary credit for work that was genuinely, substantially collaborative, subtly framing shared projects and communications with leadership as though they were the primary driver, while your own genuine contributions receive progressively less visible acknowledgement with each successive project. Applying Lesson 1, you would first recognize honestly that no external referee, no manager independently noticing this pattern without any direct information from you, is likely to correct this situation on their own, given how genuinely difficult these patterns are to notice from the outside without direct, specific information. Applying Lesson 2, you would recognize that the informal, unspoken understanding of fair credit sharing that presumably governed your working relationship at its outset appears to have been quietly abandoned by your colleague, while you have continued operating as though it remained fully in force. Applying Lesson 3, if this colleague has, in the past, offered an apology or an acknowledgement after being confronted about similar behavior, only to return to the same pattern shortly afterward, you would recognize that continuing to extend immediate, unconditional forgiveness for each new instance is unlikely to produce any genuine change, having already demonstrated its ineffectiveness through direct, repeated experience. Applying Lesson 4, you would recognize honestly that this specific competitive dynamic may not be structurally fair to begin with, if your colleague has more established relationships with the leadership team receiving these communications. Your own countervailing evidence and countervailing communication may need to work considerably harder to receive equal, serious consideration. Applying Lesson 5, you would ask honestly whether continuing to quietly accept this pattern, avoiding the discomfort of raising it directly, genuinely serves your own interests, or whether it has primarily served your colleague's continued advantage and the organization's convenience in avoiding an uncomfortable conversation. Applying Lesson 6, you would assess honestly whether this situation has actually risen to the level of genuine necessity, a pattern repeated significantly enough, and with sufficiently serious consequences for your own career and reputation, to justify a more direct, less diplomatically cautious response than you might extend toward a genuinely isolated, minor incident. And applying Lesson 7 throughout this entire process, you would ensure that whatever direct action you ultimately take, documenting the pattern clearly, raising it directly and specifically with your colleague or with appropriate leadership, remains proportionate and factual, focused on establishing an accurate, fair account of actual contribution, rather than escalating into something considerably more aggressive, personal, or disproportionate to what has actually, demonstrably occurred. This kind of careful, deliberate reasoning through an actual, specific situation illustrates considerably more clearly than abstract principle alone exactly how these 7 lessons are meant to function together, not as a blanket license for aggressive, defensive behavior in every interaction, but as a careful, honest framework for recognizing exactly when a genuine, demonstrated pattern actually justifies moving beyond passive, quiet acceptance toward more direct, deliberate action. Why some people will call this advice cynical, and why that criticism deserves an honest response. It is worth addressing directly a criticism that material like today's video frequently receives, the accusation that framing relationships and conflicts in these terms, analyzing patterns, considering proportionate response, questioning who benefits from graceful acceptance, represents a fundamentally cynical, transactional way of viewing human relationships that ultimately damages the genuine trust and generosity that make relationships worth having in the first place. This criticism deserves genuine, honest engagement rather than dismissal, because there is a real, legitimate concern underneath it worth taking seriously. If the ideas discussed throughout today's video were applied as a default, constant lens through which every single relationship and every single interaction was analyzed for potential unfairness and calculated for proportionate response, the resulting way of moving through life would indeed become genuinely exhausting, genuinely isolating, and genuinely corrosive to the kind of easy, generous trust that makes close relationships genuinely worth having. This is precisely why today's video has repeatedly, deliberately emphasized that these lessons are meant for a specific, narrower category of situations, ones involving genuine, demonstrated patterns of bad faith from people who have already, through their own repeated conduct, earned this more careful scrutiny rather than as a constant, default operating mode applied indiscriminately to every relationship in your life. The considerably healthier alternative to both extremes, naive, unconditional fairness applied regardless of how it is reciprocated, and constant, exhausting, cynical calculation applied to every single interaction without exception, involves maintaining genuine, generous good faith as your actual default operating mode with the people in your life, reserving the more careful, more guarded analysis discussed throughout today's video specifically for the considerably smaller number of situations and relationships that have actually, demonstrably earned it through genuine, repeated patterns of bad faith. This balanced approach allows you to remain genuinely warm, generous, and trusting in the overwhelming majority of your relationships, while retaining the genuine capacity, when it is actually demonstrably warranted, to recognize and respond appropriately to the specific people and situations that have shown you clearly, through their own repeated conduct, that this default good faith is no longer being reciprocated. A final reflection on what this shift is actually protecting. Before we move toward today's close, it is worth sitting honestly with what everything discussed throughout this video is actually working to protect, because it was never, at its core, simply about winning more conflicts or accumulating more advantage over the people around you. It was about protecting your own genuine capacity for trust, generosity, and good faith over the full course of your life, by ensuring these qualities are not repeatedly, unconditionally extended toward the specific people who have already demonstrated, through genuine, repeated conduct, that they will not honor them in return. There is a particular kind of quiet damage that accumulates in a person who continues extending unconditional fairness toward people who have clearly, repeatedly abandoned it themselves. A damage considerably harder to see directly than a single dramatic betrayal, but considerably more corrosive over the long run, because it teaches that person, slowly and painfully, that their own fairness and good faith are simply resources to be extracted rather than qualities genuinely worth protecting and reciprocating. This is precisely the outcome everything discussed throughout today's video has been trying to help you avoid, not by encouraging you to abandon fairness and good faith altogether, an outcome that would cost you considerably more than it would ever protect, but by helping you develop the genuine discernment required to know exactly when continued fairness has stopped protecting you and started quietly costing you instead, and exactly what a proportionate, honest response to that specific situation actually requires. What changes once you stop waiting for the referee? There is one final, genuinely practical observation worth sharing before we move toward today's close. A description of what actually tends to change in a person's daily experience once they have genuinely internalized the shift from passive waiting toward the kind of careful, deliberate discernment discussed throughout today's video. The most immediate, noticeable change tends to be a genuine reduction in a particular kind of quiet, chronic frustration. The frustration of continuing to watch an unfair pattern repeat itself while waiting indefinitely for some external correction that never actually arrives. This frustration, once you have genuinely stopped waiting passively for it to resolve itself and have instead developed the discernment to recognize when direct, proportionate action is actually warranted, tends to be replaced by something considerably more stable, a genuine sense of agency over situations that previously felt entirely outside your control. This does not mean every single situation discussed throughout today's video resolves neatly or easily once you apply these lessons. Some genuinely difficult relationships and situations remain genuinely difficult, regardless of how skillfully you apply careful, honest discernment to them. But the specific chronic frustration of passive waiting, of continuing to honor an agreement or a fairness that has already been abandoned by the other side, tends to ease considerably, replaced by the more grounded, if sometimes more difficult, experience of actually, directly addressing situations that genuinely warrant it, rather than continuing to hope they will somehow resolve themselves without any direct action on your part. How to actually start applying these lessons? Understanding these 7 lessons intellectually is a meaningful first step, but genuinely applying them requires deliberate, honest assessment of your own specific relationships and circumstances, not simply passive agreement with the ideas presented throughout today's video. This kind of honest assessment takes real time and real reflection, and it deserves to be conducted carefully rather than rushed through in the heat of a single frustrating moment, when clear, honest judgment about genuine patterns versus isolated incidents is considerably harder to access reliably. Begin by identifying one specific situation in your own life where you have genuinely been waiting for an external referee, a boss, a friend group, a shared understanding of fairness, to correct an injustice you have been quietly enduring, and consider honestly what direct, deliberate action that situation might actually require of you, instead of continued patient waiting. Identify one specific relationship or agreement where you suspect you may be the only party still genuinely honoring the original, mutually understood terms, and consider gathering clearer, more honest evidence about whether that suspicion is actually accurate before deciding how to respond to it. Reflect honestly on any recent instance where you extended mercy or forgiveness considerably before the other party had genuinely demonstrated understanding or genuine change, and consider what a more appropriately timed response might have looked like instead, not as a rule to apply retroactively with resentment, but as a genuine lesson for how you might handle a similar situation differently going forward. Take an honest look at one competitive environment in your own life, and ask yourself directly whether you have been strategizing as though that environment is genuinely level and fair, when a more honest assessment might reveal structural advantages and disadvantages worth factoring more directly into your actual strategy. Examine one recent instance of quiet, graceful acceptance of a genuinely unfair outcome, and ask honestly who that quiet acceptance actually served, before deciding whether a similar situation in the future might genuinely warrant a more direct, less immediately comfortable response. And throughout every single one of these reflections, continue returning to the crucial distinction discussed in Lesson 7, checking honestly whether the specific action you are actually considering constitutes genuine, necessary ruthlessness in response to someone else's already demonstrated bad faith, or whether it has begun drifting towards something considerably closer to unnecessary cruelty, applied to a situation or a person that never actually warranted that response in the first place. a final warning about who this advice is actually for. Before we close today's video, it is worth stating something directly and without any hedging, because the material discussed throughout today's video carries genuine risk if it is misapplied or misunderstood. A risk worth taking seriously, rather than glossing over, simply because the rest of this video has been building toward a satisfying, empowering conclusion. Everything discussed today is specifically intended for situations where you have genuine, clear evidence that the other party has already abandoned fairness in their own conduct toward you, not as a general license to become suspicious, defensive, or preemptively ruthless toward people who have given you no actual reason to abandon ordinary trust and ordinary good faith. Applying Machiavelli's darkest lessons indiscriminately to people and situations that never actually warranted them does not make you strategically wise. It makes you someone who has quietly become the exact kind of person this video has been encouraging you to finally stop losing to. Someone who abandons fairness preemptively, rather than in genuine, warranted response to someone else's already demonstrated bad faith. The genuine skill this entire video has been trying to help you develop is not blanket ruthlessness. It is genuine, honest discernment, the ability to accurately distinguish between the people and situations in your life that genuinely still deserve your ordinary trust, patience, and good faith, and the specific, narrower category of people and situations that have already, through their own demonstrated conduct, forfeited that same consideration. Getting this discernment right matters enormously, considerably more than any single lesson discussed throughout today's video taken in isolation, because it is precisely this discernment that determines whether you end up genuinely protected or whether you end up, through careless misapplication, becoming someone considerably worse than the person you originally set out to stop losing to. That brings us to the end of today's deep dive into Machiavelli's darkest, most uncomfortable lessons on exactly when fairness stops being a virtue and starts being a slow, one-sided surrender. A distinction worth carrying carefully rather than applying carelessly to every disagreement you encounter going forward. The referee you have been waiting for was never actually coming, and passive waiting rarely corrects genuine injustice on its own. Rules only bind the party who still genuinely believes in them, and continuing to honor an agreement the other side has quietly abandoned protects nobody but the party, already benefiting from that abandonment. Mercy offered before genuine understanding or genuine change has actually occurred frequently teaches the other party that your forgiveness carries no real cost. The level playing field is frequently a comforting fiction, and strategizing around its honest, actual shape serves you considerably better than strategizing around wishful thinking. Losing with quiet dignity primarily serves whoever benefited from the original unfairness, and it is worth asking honestly whether that quiet acceptance is actually serving your own genuine interests. Genuine necessity, not ordinary disagreement or minor frustration, is the only situation that actually justifies setting fairness aside. And ruthless was never meant to mean cruel, it was always meant to mean refusing to remain the only one still fighting fair against someone who quietly stopped fighting fair a long time ago. Carry these 7 lessons with you, not as a license for indiscriminate cruelty toward people who have done nothing to deserve it, but as genuine, careful discernment about exactly when continued fairness stops protecting you and starts costing you, reserved specifically for the people and situations that have already, through their own conduct, earned that response from you. Before you go, I want to ask you once more for a few small things that genuinely matter to this channel. If today's video gave you real clarity about your own patterns, please take a moment to hit the like button. It costs you nothing and directly helps this video reach more people who genuinely need it. Leave a comment below and tell us honestly which of these 7 lessons hit closest to home for you. We genuinely read every single comment, and they genuinely shape the direction of future videos here on The Hidden Mind. If you know someone who keeps losing precisely because they refuse to abandon a rulebook the other side has already thrown away, please share this video with them today. It might be exactly the shift they have been needing. And if you have not yet subscribed to The Hidden Mind, now is the perfect moment. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our weekly deep dives into power, psychology, and the hidden mechanics of human influence. Finally, if this video delivered genuine value to you and you would like to directly support the growth of this channel, please consider leaving a super thanks using the button below. Every single contribution genuinely helps us continue building content exactly like this for you. Until next time, remember that playing fair against someone who has already stopped was never actually virtue. It was surrender wearing virtue's clothing, and knowing exactly when to stop is not cruelty. It is finally refusing to fight with one hand tied behind your back. This has been The Hidden Mind, and we will see you again in the next one, considerably harder to quietly take advantage of than you were before.